Imagine trying to navigate a ship, right, through a perfect storm. You're clutching the wheel, knuckles white, desperate to control every single wave, every gust of wind, every little change, every variable. You're trying to bend it to your will, even while chaos is just raging all around you. Or maybe you've been on the receiving end of that, feeling this invisible hand trying to steer your journey, dictating even your smallest choices, making your life feel, well, constrained. That feeling, that relentless need to control everything. Or, the flip side, being controlled by everything. It's this profound and actually surprisingly common human thing. So today we're taking a deep dive into exactly that, dealing with control issues, letting go of the need to control everything. Our mission here. Well, we want to take you on a journey, really illuminate the surprising, often hidden origins of controlling behaviors. We'll pull back the curtain on how they show up, those subtle, kind of insidious ways they creep into our lives, our relationships. And most importantly, we want to equip you with some powerful, practical strategies, tools to really release that grip of unnecessary control. The goal is paving the way for deeper trust, genuine freedom, and just a more expansive sense of well-being, in your life, your connections. We'll dig out the most important nuggets, make sure you walk away not just informed, but hopefully with some real aha moments. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. When we talk about control issues, that's not like an official diagnosis you'd find in a psychology textbook, because it's more like a common phrase, something people say, right? But it points to something very real. So what's the first big distinction we need to make? Because control itself, that word, it can be tricky.
Yeah, that's a really crucial starting point. You're right. Control issues isn't a clinical term, but it perfectly captures a set of behaviors we see all the time. Behaviors that almost always come from something deeper, often unacknowledged psychological patterns. And the first, maybe the most vital distinction, is between being in control and being controlling. Now, being in control, that's actually healthy. It's a sign of good self-awareness, confidence, strong self-esteem. It means you're managing your own life effectively. You're making intentional choices, navigating your path. It's about personal agency, really. But being controlling, that's where it gets unhealthy, very unhealthy. And paradoxically, it's often a really clear, painful sign that someone actually feels deeply out of control inside. This behavior, it typically isn't born out of malice, or some desire to dominate. It's usually rooted in this profound sense of fear or underlying anxiety and very often low self-esteem. It's a coping mechanism, maybe a flawed one, but a way to try and manage this internal landscape of uncertainty and vulnerability.
That's quite a twist, isn't it? The common assumption is often that controlling behavior comes from strength, maybe dominance. But you're saying it's frequently born from this deep inner insecurity.
That's often the counterintuitive truth, yeah. These controlling instincts, they rarely, if ever, stem from genuine malice. Quite the opposite, actually. They can be a clumsy, misguided attempt to build a close relationship just without the right emotional tools or skills to do it healthily. Think of it like trying to build something beautiful and intricate, but all you have is a hammer. You might mean well, but you're likely to cause damage because you're using the wrong tool. Sometimes it's just an unconscious coping mechanism for an underlying mental health condition, or maybe a reaction to past experiences playing out now. In, rarer, more extreme cases, yes, some people might consciously exploit others or maintain power, but for most people, it's a deeply ingrained, often desperate coping strategy.
Okay, so if control often stems from fear, anxiety, feeling fundamentally out of control, how does that fit with something like trust? They feel like polar opposites, don't they?
They absolutely are total opposing forces. And understanding how different they are is foundational to all of this. Let's define them clearly, because the definitions themselves really highlight the stark contrast. Trust, right at its core, is assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something. It involves confidence, hope, belief, and really crucially, a deep sense of emotional safety. It's a willingness to be vulnerable, to kind of lay down your defenses and believe in the good intentions or competence of another person. And here's the key thing. Trust is given freely. It's an offering, an opening up.
Right. And control then. How does that stand against trust?
Control, on the other hand, it's defined as exercising, restraining, or directing influence over something or someone. It is fundamentally an attempt to have power, and it often stems directly from that deep-seated worry, fear, anxiety, or insecurity. It's this desperate desire to prevent disappointment or hurt that you anticipate might happen. So unlike trust, which is freely given and expansive, control is imposed. It's forced. It's a completely different energy, a tightening, a clenching.
So one builds up, expands, creates connection, and the other just, tears things down.
Exactly. Think of trust like fertile soil in a garden. It gives the nutrients, the space for a plant to grow naturally, right? To show its own unique beauty and strength. It shows confidence in the plant's ability to thrive on its own terms. And that confidence, that nurtures and grows relationships. It gives people space to be themselves, to flourish. We all appreciate it when someone likes us, sees our best, trusts our judgment. It makes us feel valued, connected. But control is like constantly pruning and bending that plant into some unnatural shape you decided on. Or even worse, yanking it up by the roots all the time to check on it. It stifles growth. It creates this strained artificial form. Or it can even kill the plant, metaphorically speaking, kill the relationship. When we exert control, it can be like a slow poison, subtly eroding the relationship over time. It breeds resentment, disrespect, because, well, honestly, who likes being constantly told what to do, how to act, how to feel? It feels infantilizing, doesn't it? Disempowering, deeply frustrating. The person being controlled feels diminished, stifled, and often deeply resentful. And that just breaks down genuine connection.
That's a really powerful image, the slow poison. Makes total sense that something so stifling would end up destroying what it's trying to hold on to. So if this need for control is so damaging, both to the controller and the controlled, where does it even come from? What are its roots deep down in our psychology?
Well, the desire to control, it's a shared human thing. It's an instinct really deeply rooted in our primal need to feel safe, secure. Fear, in all its forms, is often the main fuel for this drive. Our brains, they're wired to interpret feeling in control, even if that control is just an illusion or over some tiny little thing, as a signal of safety, of certainty. And that feeling can, in turn, reduce the sense of threat, stress, anxiety. It's like a desperate attempt to create order in a world that often feels pretty chaotic.
And I guess that need for safety, for certainty, it gets dialed way up when we feel vulnerable, when our sense of well-being feels genuinely threatened.
Precisely. That primal need for control, it gets heightened dramatically when we feel emotionally vulnerable, deeply insecure, maybe unmoored from our usual supports. It can rise up really fiercely when we face potential threats, whether they're real, tangible dangers or maybe deeply imagined possibilities. Think about the fear of abandonment by a partner or the uncertainty of a health crisis or even just the fear of being excluded by a group. These situations trigger that deep-seated instinctual drive to regain some kind of predictability, some influence, however illusory it might be. We just crave certainty to quiet the anxiety.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It connects to why people might cling so tightly to things or outcomes or the people. Actually, our sources point to 8 specific underlying psychological causes for these controlling behaviors. Let's dig into those because they really paint a more nuanced picture of the internal struggles.
Absolutely. And understanding these causes isn't about labeling or judging, right? It's about gaining compassionate insight into the underlying pain that drives these patterns, whether it's in ourselves or someone else. First, and probably the most common, is anxiety. If you often find yourself caught in that relentless loop of worrying about things others aren't, or constantly running through worst-case scenarios, or maybe you have a deep fear of being judged, seeking control can easily become your go-to coping mechanism. Even if it doesn't really work long-term. You try to control the external stuff to quiet the internal storm. The fundamental problem, of course, is you just can't control everything. And trying to constantly, exhaustingly, it's a direct path to burnout, mentally and physically. It's like trying to bail out the ocean with a teacup. Impossible.
Yeah.
Utterly draining.
Right. And building on that, if you're constantly worried, constantly trying to predict and prevent, that can easily lead to feelings of insecurity or low self-worth, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. They often go hand in hand. When someone struggles with deep feelings of low self-worth, they might constantly try to prove their value by over-controlling external situations or people. It's like a desperate attempt to show competence or importance. And furthermore, if your sense of self is too tied up in your roles, like being the perfect parent, the indispensable spouse, the top employee, or if your whole identity is wrapped up in your relationships, then any perceived threat or change to those roles or relationships can feel like a deep personal attack. Your efforts to maintain them or your perceived worth within them can then come out as controlling, even seemingly selfish behaviors. You're basically trying to control the external mirror to reflect a better internal image.
That really links into perfectionism too, which I've always seen as a kind of double-edged sword. It can drive achievement, sure, but it sounds like it has a much darker controlling side here.
You're spot on. Perfectionism, often at its core, isn't really about achieving true excellence. It's more about managing that deep anxiety, that fear of failure, those nagging feelings of low self-worth. For many people, especially if they grew up relying heavily on external praise and achievement for validation, maybe without enough unconditional support, perfectionism can become a core part of their identity. Their worth gets tangled up with flawless execution. And so when others around them inevitably don't meet their super high, often rigid ideals, partner leaves dishes in the sink, colleague misses a deadline, controlling behaviors can pop up. It's this desperate, almost frantic attempt to micromanage and maintain those perfect standards. It's really an attempt to control the outcome to protect their fragile sense of self.
So it's less about the perfect result itself and more about controlling the environment, controlling others to get that result and keep their own sense of order and worth intact. Okay, what about trust issues? That seems like a very direct link to controlling behaviors, almost intuitive.
It is, absolutely. If you have a history of being taken advantage of or betrayed or just repeatedly let down by people who should have been reliable, your natural instinct, maybe a wounded instinct, might be to control situations and relationships really tightly. It's a powerful, although ultimately counterproductive, protective mechanism. The thinking is, if I control everything, I can stop past hurts from happening again. But this survival strategy, unfortunately, often results in treating others unfairly, especially people in your present life who have no intention of hurting you. You end up projecting those painful past experiences onto totally new relationships.
And then there's codependency. That feels like a really complex, often misunderstood dynamic. It seems to tangle up care and control.
Yeah, codependency is definitely complex. It's this deeply unhealthy relationship pattern where one person becomes overly reliant on another for their emotional well-being, their identity, their self-worth. They often pour enormous energy into caring for, fixing, or rescuing the other person, frequently sacrificing their own needs, dreams, boundaries, eventually developing deep resentment. And the roles can flip too, where the person being cared for becomes dependent, which is another form of control. In really codependent family dynamics, emotional boundaries often get blurred or just disappear. And tragically, control gets confused with love or real connection. That's what we call enmeshment. Imagine two people whose emotional boundaries are so fuzzy, it's like they're tangled up together, can't tell where one person's feelings stop and the other's start. In those situations, control gets tragically mistaken for deep connection, or even love itself.
That's heartbreaking. Confusing control with love. What about a deep-seated fear of abandonment? How does that show up as controlling behavior?
A profound, often unconscious fear of abandonment can absolutely drive someone to exert control. This fear often goes back to early life experiences like physical or emotional neglect from caregivers. Maybe a parent was physically there, but emotionally distant, unreliable, inconsistent with affection. Even if caregivers were physically present, consistent emotional neglect, lack of attunement, validation, responsiveness can be just as damaging as physical absence. This creates this deep, desperate fear that the people you care about will leave you, and then a compensatory need to control them to make sure they don't, often by clinging too tight or micromanaging their lives.
And sadly, caste abuse can also leave these deep scars that powerfully manifest as controlling tendencies later on.
Precisely. It's a tragic reality that we are often hurt most deeply by the very people who are supposed to love and care for us unconditionally. If someone has experienced abuse, physical, emotional, psychological, sexual, they might develop this sort of paradox. A desperate desire for real connection, but at the same time, an intense reflexive fear of intimacy and vulnerability. In that scenario, controlling others becomes this deeply ingrained, often unconscious way of keeping them at arm's length. Maintaining a safe distance, protecting oneself from getting too vulnerable or being hurt again. But the cruel paradox is, to have truly authentic, deeply connected, trusting relationships, we have to be vulnerable. We need to allow real intimacy to happen. Without vulnerability, there's no true authenticity.
Right. And finally, you mentioned feeling powerful. Is that just about ego, or is there something more complicated going on there?
Well, feeling powerful is very rarely the only cause, but it can be a contributing factor, especially when it's mixed in with some of the other deep pains we've discussed. In some, maybe rarer cases, people might consciously or unconsciously exploit others, perhaps because they've been deeply hurt in the past and see exerting power now as a kind of twisted way of getting their due or evening the score for past powerlessness. It's like a compensatory thing. However, it is absolutely crucial to recognize the profound harm caused in those situations. A real sign of emotional maturity and growth isn't about gaining power over others. It's about recognizing when you have caused harm and then taking concrete, accountable steps to repair the situation.
It sounds like a lot of these causes, trust issues, past abuse, chronic anxiety, they all kind of lead back to this core overarching idea, the shadow of trauma.
You're absolutely right. A history of traumatic events, incidents causing significant physical, emotional, or psychological pain, whether it's single big events or prolonged, subtle, difficult experiences, can definitely trigger a profound, often overwhelming need for control. Trauma deeply changes the brain's perception of safety. It can lead to what we call cognitive distortions, basically, faulty thinking patterns that warp how we see reality. One really common and insidious one is catastrophizing. That's where your mind automatically jumps to the absolute worst-case scenario, blowing a small setback or minor uncertainty into this massive impending disaster. It's like your brain's internal alarm system is stuck on catastrophe imminent. This constant, overwhelming worst-case thinking fuels an intense, almost frantic need to control every single variable to try and prevent those imagined disasters. For example, in therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, we work a lot on identifying and then gently challenging and changing these distressing, unhelpful beliefs, helping people replace them with more realistic thoughts, and ultimately control their own thought patterns better, rather than trying to control the whole world.
Wow. So whether it's chronic anxiety, the echoes of past trauma, deep insecurity, the underlying thread seems to be this desperate internal attempt to manage overwhelming pain or fear or uncertainty by relentlessly trying to exert external control. But what are the costs? Why does this intense, often unconscious drive to control, no matter where it comes from, almost always backfires, inflicting more pain than it prevents?
Oh, it backfires hugely, often devastatingly, both on the controller's own well-being and, crucially, on their relationships. Let's start with the controller's well-being. The constant, relentless effort to micromanage people, predict outcomes, dictate situations. It activates your brain's stress response system way too much at an unsustainable rate. I'll get a bit sciencey for a second, but it's important to grasp the physiological toll. Our brain has this ancient command center, the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, adrenal glands working in this rapid chain reaction. When you perceive a threat, even just a perceived loss of control, the system kicks into overdrive, flooding your body with cortisol, our main stress hormone. It's your body's internal alarm system blaring, getting you ready for fight or flight.
And we're not really built to be in that constant state of high alert for long periods, are we? That just sounds exhausting and damaging.
Definitely not. It's essential for immediate danger, sure, but if that alarm keeps ringing constantly, if you're always feeling that need to control, it starts to wear down the very parts of your brain designed for calm, rational thought, emotional regulation. Prolonged chronic stress and high cortisol levels have seriously detrimental effects. They impair cognitive function, affecting your ability to make clear decisions, form memories, solve problems effectively. Research even shows chronic high cortisol can literally shrink the prefrontal cortex. That's the part for higher thinking, planning, impulse control, and disrupt the hippocampus, crucial for memory and emotion. So the very act of trying to control everything can actually make you less able to think clearly, solve problems, and manage your own emotions. It creates this vicious cycle.
That's an incredibly destructive feedback loop. The more you try to control, the more stressed you get. Your brain struggles, which probably makes you feel even more out of control, driving you to try and control harder.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a tragic paradox. Your brain is perpetually scanning for potential threats to its carefully controlled world, creating this constant state of hypervigilance, anxiety. This relentless internal pressure inevitably leads straight to burnout, emotional overload, and can contribute to anxiety disorders, even depression. And when inevitably things don't go according to those unrealistic engineered expectations, because you just cannot control everything or everyone, it leads to intense frustration, anger, a deep sense of powerlessness, which only feeds back into the cycle of over-control.
So it's personally destructive, this silent internal battle. But what about the impact on others? How does this relentless need for control damage the very relationships it's often trying, however clumsily, to protect or maybe even create?
Yeah, trying to control other people, whether it's obvious or subtle, almost always backfires. It severely strains relationships, leads to profound feelings of isolation, both for the controller and the controlled. Humans were intrinsically wired for autonomy, right? We naturally resist being manipulated or coerced or micromanaged. Attempts to do that invariably lead to conflict, simmering resentment, and eventually a complete breakdown of trust. It's fundamentally disempowering. I mean, think about it. Who really likes being constantly told what to do, how to act, how to feel? It feels suffocating. It just erodes genuine connection.
And I can imagine this creating a really destructive, self-perpetuating cycle within a relationship, the kind of relational death spiral.
Oh, absolutely. We see this destructive cycle play out all the time. One person's hurtful action, maybe intentional, maybe not, a betrayal, a lapse in judgment, leads the other person to exert control, often out of fear or a desperate attempt to prevent more pain. But this exertion of control often makes the first person become defensive, maybe lie or hide things, not necessarily out of malice, but as a way to reclaim autonomy or just avoid conflict. And what happens then? You end up with this culture of dishonesty, secrecy, zero transparency. This escalates the hurt, creates more pain, more distance, and can potentially just destroy the foundation of trust in the relationship. It's a definite downward spiral.
And beyond the direct conflict and resentment and dishonesty, there's also that element of hindering growth in the person being controlled, something like an unintended consequence, but really damaging.
Yes, profoundly so. It's like that classic analogy. The child whose meat is always cut for them, or whose shoes are always tied by a parent. They never learn to cut their own steak, tie their own laces, navigate the world independently. If you constantly clean up after someone, or solve all their problems, or make all their decisions, they'll never learn to organize, problem solve, take responsibility, or develop their own critical thinking. This misplaced control may be born of good intentions, but coming across as overreach, it effectively prevents growth and healthy development in others. It stunts them, keeps them reliant. And that's a significant, often invisible cost of controlling behavior. It just stifles their potential.
Okay, so now that we've got a handle on the deep roots, the physiological costs, the relational damage of controlling behavior, let's pivot to spotting it. Because, like you said earlier, it's not always the obvious loud demands or manipulations. It can be incredibly subtle, almost like a shadow.
You're absolutely right. Controlling behavior often isn't blatant at all. In fact, its most potent and damaging forms can be deeply insidious. It's that moment you find yourself instinctively changing your own behavior, your preferences, maybe even your true opinions, just to match their preference. Not out of healthy compromise, but purely to avoid the huge emotional energy you'd have to spend justifying your own choices, or facing their disapproval, or the silent treatment, or some emotional backlash. That's not negotiation. It's conflict avoidance driven by their control. It feels like walking on eggshells constantly.
Can you give us some key patterns or subtle signs to look out for? Things that illustrate this insidious nature.
Sure. One really common pattern is micromanagement, where your partner or friend or family member has an opinion on every small detail of your life, how you fold laundry, how you drive, how you organize your desk, and critically insists there's one right way to do it, which, surprise, surprise, is always their way. Then there's dishonesty. Lying or hiding information, maybe about money, where they've been, past mistakes. Not always with malicious intent, but often just to get their way, avoid disagreement, or maintain this manufactured sense of control over the situation.
Yeah, I can see how that just chips away at trust layer by layer. What about manipulation? That feels particularly tricky to spot sometimes.
Manipulation often involves subtle but persistent pressure, or maybe deliberately minimizing your actions, feelings, or needs, all designed to get their desired outcome. Think phrases like, "If you really cared about me, you'd," or "after everything I've done for you." They're using your emotions, your sense of obligation, your desire for connection against you. Overprotectiveness is another subtle one. If they're controlling with you, it often extends to kids too, mirroring that pattern, stifling the children's independence.
And emotional bullying? That sounds particularly damaging and just hard to escape.
It is. This can look like constant, draining criticism about your looks, your intelligence, your choices, or maybe incessant taunting disguised as jokes. But the most insidious form here is gaslighting. Gaslighting is this powerful psychological manipulation where someone tries to make you doubt your own perception of reality. They'll deny events that clearly happen, dismiss your concerns as overreacting or imagining things, or even tell you flat out your feelings are invalid. They'll confidently state their own thoughts and feelings as the absolute truth, leaving you totally confused, questioning your memory, doubting your own sanity, really. It's designed to disorient and disempower you.
That's genuinely chilling. What other behaviors might signal this kind of underlying control?
Well, you might notice a consistent pattern of interrupting, where they just habitually speak over you, showing a real lack of respect for your voice and thoughts. Or unilateral decision-making, making significant life decisions, cars, moves, vacations, even wedding plans, without genuinely consulting you or valuing your input. There's also pervasive nagging, just relentless, persistent criticism about really personal choices like your food, smoking, health habits, even how you manage your day.
And jealousy feels like a classic sign, almost textbook, of that insecurity-driven control.
Jealousy is indeed a direct, often painful manifestation of their own deep insecurity and fear. It reveals a low self-esteem that, crucially, has absolutely nothing to do with you or your actions. They might accuse you, monitor you, try to isolate you from friends, all stemming from their own internal fear of loss. And finally, a very telling and frustrating sign is attacking when confronted. When you try to set a perfectly reasonable boundary, like, please don't speak to me that way, they'll likely attack you back. Accusations like, why are you yelling at me? You're the one being controlling. They just flip the script, deflect, blame you, make you feel responsible for their reaction.
Wow, those are incredibly insightful. They paint a clear, if disturbing picture. Let's maybe get into some more real-life examples because these patterns can be so hard to spot when you're in the thick of it. I heard about a relationship where one partner would subtly critique phone calls with family, saying things like, you sound so childish when you talk to your mom, or you seem desperate for attention, until the person gradually, almost without realizing it, just reduced contact with their own family.
That's a perfect and chilling example of controlling relationships right there. Or think about fabricating negative comments about your friends or family to systematically isolate you from your support system. I remember a case where someone would constantly tell their partner, I don't get why you talk to them, they're clearly just using you, subtly implying friends are untrustworthy. This leads to really profound, dangerous isolation, makes you more dependent on the controller.
And it extends to personal interests too, right? Like controlling hobbies, often through ridicule.
Oh, absolutely. Someone shared how their partner would relentlessly tease them about the dumb shows or pointless hobbies they enjoy just to unwind. Eventually, they felt so embarrassed or ashamed they just stopped engaging with those things entirely, even when they were alone. Or imagine being met with passive aggressiveness, eye rolls, outright ridicule for anything you show interest in or want to achieve, from new music to a career path. The insidious goal is to subtly erode your identity, making you feel like you have to turn yourself into nothing just to have nothing for him to comment on. It's a real stripping away of the self.
Ugh, that sounds like it would just drain all the joy and spontaneity out of life. What about controlling seemingly mundane personal habits?
Oh, definitely. It can be incredibly petty but have a huge impact. Complaining about your food choices, like saying you're drinking too much milk or eating too many carbs as if they're your personal dietitian. Or insisting you can't button your coat in freezing weather because women look better with coats undone. Or even forbidding you from carrying an umbrella unless it's actively raining right that second. These seem trivial, almost absurd, but cumulatively they add up to a complete loss of personal autonomy over your own body and choices. One person even shared being constantly told their natural hair looked ugly, or being pressured to wear makeup for every outing, even just a trip to the grocery store. And that is particularly damaging, even abusive, if you're recovering from body image issues. It re-traumatizes and just compounds existing insecurities.
And time. Our own time feels so personal. That seems like an area control could easily sneak into.
It does, and it's deeply invasive when it happens. Demanding exact timings for totally inconsequential activities. How long will your phone call with your sister be? Or what exact time are you going to bed tonight? And then labeling you unreliable or disrespectful if you miss those arbitrary times by even a minute. This makes you feel constantly rushed, on edge, under surveillance, even when there's no real reason. Or micromanaging your daily life, demanding to know your precise whereabouts constantly, dictating driving routes, controlling the music in the car, even where you're allowed to park. It's an attempt to control your very movement through the world.
So it's not just about the specific actions, but the pervasive cumulative impact on you. That feeling of your life becoming too small, as the sources put it.
Exactly. Another common pattern is a profound lack of reciprocity. They expect you to be super enthusiastic about their hobbies, interests, friends, family, but they completely ignore or dismiss yours. Or making everything in the relationship transactional, either explicitly or implicitly. Like, well, I cooked dinner and did the dishes, so now you owe me this specific sexual favor. It just reduces the relationship to demands and payments, stripping away genuine affection or shared give and take.
And a core violation, really, of any healthy relationship is just persistently disrespecting boundaries, even when you've clearly stated them.
That's a huge fundamental breach. Not allowing you to say no to anything without some form of immediate punishment, ridicule, the silent treatment, an angry outburst. They continually push their contrasting opinions, beliefs, preferences onto you until you feel utterly wrong and pressure to accept their view as more valid, more correct. It's an insidious way they try to tell you what to think, feel, and do, indirectly and directly. The overall crushing impact, as you said so well, is making your entire life feel too small. It subtly, relentlessly sucks the joy, the spontaneity, the authentic self right out of your existence. You're made to feel guilty for normal things. They use the selfish card to manipulate, accuse you of cheating for totally benign interactions. It's truly miserable, leaves you constantly walking on eggshells, fearing their unpredictable reactions.
That is a stark, painful picture. Okay, so we've identified the problem. Its deep roots, its devastating costs, and its subtle, insidious ways of showing up. Now, for the most important part of our deep dive, the path to letting go. Because understanding the science and psychology is incredibly helpful, right? But true, transformative growth happens when you learn to release that grip of trying to control others and instead courageously shift your focus back to yourself. What are some core powerful strategies for releasing this often unconscious need for external control?
Yeah, this shift is truly transformative. It's moving from trying to orchestrate the world to cultivating internal mastery. The first core strategy is simple, almost deceptively so, but incredibly powerful. Mel Robbins' let them theory. At its core, this is about releasing that pervasive urge to micromanage, interfere, or control the actions, choices, behaviors of others by simply reminding yourself to let them. Whether it's letting a colleague take a different, maybe less efficient approach, allowing your partner to make their own mistakes, or letting your child learn a hard lesson through natural consequences. The idea is to profoundly respect other people's autonomy, even when you think you know better, or when their choices might lead to discomfort for you or them.
That sounds almost too easy. Just say let them.
Yeah.
Why does such a simple phrase actually work, and how can we apply it in those moments when that control impulse flares up hard?
It works because it fundamentally shifts your internal focus, profoundly. Instead of obsessing over fixing, changing, or manipulating others, you consciously choose to accept them as they are, with their unique journey, their imperfections, their right to choose their own path. This, in turn, conserves your precious emotional and mental energy for what truly matters: your own well-being, your growth, your choices. The practical application is simple, but yeah, it requires conscious effort. The next time you feel that familiar, tight urge to intervene, advise, correct, control someone else, just pause, take a deep breath, and then simply say, let them, out loud or just internally. Repeat it. Even when your emotions are swirling, when judgment or fear creeps in, repeat it until you feel that tightness in your body start to loosen, your shoulders drop, your mind quiets down a bit. It's a powerful, almost meditative way to cultivate acceptance and release that illusion of control.
That's a great tool. For immediate relief and reframing, what's the next strategy for letting go?
The next is radical acceptance. This is a cornerstone of dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. For those maybe unfamiliar, DBT is a type of cognitive behavioral therapy that helps people, especially those with intense emotions, learn to manage difficult feelings, reduce self-destructive behaviors, improve relationships. Its core idea, relevant here, is embracing reality as it is, not as you wish it were. Radical acceptance goes deeper than let them, because it's about fully acknowledging the reality of a situation, even when it's deeply painful, unfair, or imperfect, without necessarily agreeing with it, approving of it, or liking it. The key insight here is kind of revolutionary. It's often not the difficult situation itself that causes all the suffering. It's our resistance to that reality. Our refusal to accept what is creates this extra layer of immense pain and struggle.
So it's about observing reality as it is, not fighting it, even if that reality is harsh. How do we put that into practice when emotions are really high?
Precisely. It's about letting go of the fight against reality. The practical application is powerful. When you're faced with a frustrating, disappointing, or painful situation you simply cannot change, silently tell yourself something like, "This situation is difficult, it's painful, but it is not unbearable. I can get through difficult emotions." Pair that statement with a slow, deep breath. Really anchor yourself in the present. Then practice specific gratitude for something, anything, right here, right now, the feeling of your feet on the floor, the warmth of your clothes, the sound of your own breathing. This grounds you in the current reality, helps you move past the resistance, allows you to process the emotion instead of fighting it. It's about saying yes to what is, so you can then decide, okay, what next?
Okay. And then there's the 90-second rule from the neuroscientist Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. This one always fascinates me. It offers such a profound biological insight into our emotional lives.
Dr. Taylor's 90-second rule, yeah, it's not just a neat brain fact. It's a profound revelation about emotional mastery. And it's a potent tool for releasing that emotional reactivity that often fuels the need to control. She explains that the chemical response to an emotional trigger, that initial surge of adrenaline, anger, fear flooding your body, it actually only lasts about 90 seconds. Any continued emotional intensity or lingering distress after that 90-second window, that comes not from the initial chemical rush, but from our thoughts and our continued mental engagement with that emotion. It tells us that while that first surge of anger or fear might be automatic, what we do with it after 90 seconds is entirely within our conscious power. It kind of shifts the blame from the emotion itself to our prolonged mental wrestling with it. It means you have this built-in emotional escape hatch, a brief but powerful window to choose a mindful response over a reactive impulse to control.
So it essentially gives you a biological window of opportunity to choose your response instead of just being swept away by that initial emotional wave.
Right.
How do we best use those 90 seconds then?
Exactly. This tool gives you that crucial space to interrupt the destructive cycle of emotional reactivity and that reflexive urge to control. By consciously allowing yourself those 90 seconds, you can regulate your emotions more effectively and respond with clarity, intention, wisdom, rather than reacting from primal fear or anxious overcontrol practically. In a highly charged situation, when you feel that internal urge rising to take over, fix, control, set a mental or even an actual timer for 90 seconds, during that time, focus solely, completely on your breath. Inhale slowly, exhale completely. Allow the emotion to rise and fall without judgment, like a wave in the ocean. Observe any physical tension in your body and actively, consciously relax those areas. Then, once that initial wave has passed, ask yourself, okay, what action aligns with my values or my long-term goals? This grounds you, brings you back to your conscious self, fosters intentional, non-reactive decisions.
These 3 strategies, let them. Radical acceptance, the 90-second rule, they all sound like they're really about building self-awareness and internal control. The huge shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
Moving the focus from controlling others or external stuff to truly mastering yourself.
That is precisely where true sustainable growth and peace happen. You simply cannot control much out there. People will make their choices, life throws curveballs, circumstances shift. But you can profoundly control your own actions, your thoughts, your feelings. And when you commit to that internal mastery, when you empower yourself by focusing on what's within your sphere of influence, you paradoxically become much better able to influence others and situations in healthier, more productive, authentic ways. But yeah, this requires dedicated, often challenging self-work, building deep self-awareness, compassionately addressing insecurities, courageously healing past trauma or pain. Actively building genuine self-confidence from the inside out, deliberately reframing those negative perspectives. This personal work, this commitment to your inner world, honestly, it can do more for your peace and connection than you can possibly imagine.
And a crucial, maybe even revolutionary, part of that self-work for many people must be cultivating self-compassion. This sounds like a totally different approach for people who are maybe used to harsh self-criticism or always striving for external validation.
It is truly a radically new way of relating to ourselves, and it often feels counterintuitive at first. Self-compassion is fundamentally a practice of goodwill towards ourselves. It's not necessarily about generating good feelings. It's about mindfully accepting the pain of the moment, the discomfort of struggles, imperfections, and then embracing yourself through it all with deep kindness, understanding, empathy. It's remembering that imperfection, struggles, suffering aren't signs of personal failure. They're an intrinsic, often difficult part of the shared human experience. It's not about suppressing pain or fighting against it that only makes things worse. It's about holding your pain with tenderness, like you would hold a dear friend's pain.
I've heard you mention something called the backdraft phenomenon when talking about self-compassion. It sounds a bit intimidating. Can you explain why that might happen and why it's actually maybe a good sign?
Yes, it's such an important concept to understand when you start this journey, and it's not intimidating once you grasp its purpose. When you first start practicing self-compassion, especially if you've been highly self-critical for a long time, your emotional pain might actually increase initially. This is backdraft, a term borrowed from firefighting. In a fire, backdraft happens when opening a door in a burning, oxygen-starved house suddenly lets oxygen in, causing the flames to rush out intensely. A similar metaphorical thing can happen when we begin to open the door of our hearts to ourselves. As compassion, which is a form of love, goes in, old, unloved, unacknowledged wounds or conditions might surface with surprising intensity. As the saying goes, love reveals everything unlike itself. This initial surge can feel overwhelming, but it's entirely normal. And crucially, it means you're being courageous enough to finally uncover and start healing those hidden areas that have been crying out for your kindness. It's actually a sign of profound progress, deep healing beginning.
Okay, so it's a sign of healing, even if it feels tough in the moment. What are some concrete ways we can actively practice self-compassion, beyond just the idea of it?
There are many powerful, accessible practices. A fundamental one is a general self-compassion break. You intentionally apply the 3 components: kindness, common humanity, mindfulness, to whatever you're struggling with right now. Another simple yet profoundly effective one is supportive touch, like gently placing a hand over your heart or resting a hand on your cheek. This simple physical act activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's rest and digest system, helping you feel calmer, cared for, safe almost immediately. You can also actively work on changing critical self-talk. First, just acknowledge that harsh inner critic, then gently reframe those observations in a friendlier, more encouraging, more realistic way, like you'd speak to a loved one.
I imagine journaling could be incredibly helpful here too. A private space to explore these difficult feelings with kindness.
Absolutely. Journaling is a fantastic tool. Processing difficult events, emotions, inner dialogues through that lens of self-compassion significantly enhances well-being, mental and physical. And then there's identifying what you really want. This involves deeply examining your inner dialogue and reframing it to be more encouraging. Leveraging the sustainable power of love as a motivator rather than relying on the exhausting impulse of fear. And for those who are always giving the caregivers, empaths, natural helpers, self-care for caregivers is vital. Consciously keeping your heart open while caring for yourself with the same dedication you show others, specifically to prevent compassion fatigue and burnout. And remember, if you ever feel overwhelmed, if that backdraft feels too strong, it's a perfectly self-compassionate act to pull back temporarily. Focus on your breath, the soles of your feet on the ground, or do simple, ordinary behavioral self-care. Have a warm cup of tea, listen to music, pet an animal. These small acts anchor you.
All these strategies are about really deep internal shifts. But what if the controlling behaviors are super ingrained, like lifelong patterns? Or if you're dealing with the heavy weight of significant past trauma? That sounds like a huge amount to tackle totally alone.
You've hit on a critical point. While self-work is essential, it can feel overwhelming, even lonely, when facing deeply ingrained patterns or unhealed trauma. And that's precisely where the power of professional support becomes invaluable. Seeking help from a psychotherapist, an individual therapist, a couples counselor, maybe even a coach, can be profoundly transformative. These skilled professionals offer a neutral, non-judgmental, safe space to start the often challenging process of rebuilding internal trust, pinpointing the specific struggles, compassionately breaking unhealthy habits. They can help you identify subtle controlling behaviors you might not even realize you're doing. And then, crucially, guide you in building new, healthy skills like effective boundary setting, constructive conflict resolution, authentic communication. They also offer vital accountability, help you stay on track, and provide clarity on the best path forward for your unique situation.
So once we start letting go of control, nurturing self-compassion, maybe getting some professional guidance, how do we then begin to build something genuinely new and lasting? A future based not on control, but on real trust and freedom in our relationships.
Yeah, the journey to rebuilding trust, especially after it's been broken, requires intentional effort, courage, and consistent commitment from everyone involved. It really starts with a radical commitment to open communication. This means honest, transparent sharing of your deepest feelings, your unmet expectations, your perspectives. The key here is using I statements like, I need to know you'll tell me if plans change, or I feel anxious when I don't hear from you, without blaming, criticizing, or accusing the other person. Be clear, concise, direct, avoid rambling, repeating, making assumptions. And crucially, try to stay calm, centered, consciously watch your tone. Yelling, screaming, cursing usually doesn't get the result you want. In fact, it often escalates conflict and shuts down real communication. Some might say it's the only way to get through, but trust me, there are far better ways to foster understanding than demanding and controlling.
That distinction, I need to know versus you have to, brings us right to setting healthy boundaries. This is a concept people often misunderstand, right? Sometimes even confuse it with being controlling. What's the real difference between a boundary and control?
This is such a critical distinction. It can transform relationships. Boundaries are fundamentally personal limits you set for yourself. What you will and won't tolerate. What you need to feel safe and respected. Think of them like lines on a road. They're there for your safety, guiding your behavior, protecting your space. A boundary is about you and your needs. Control, on the other hand, is limits you try to exert on others. Demands, threats, manipulations designed to dictate their behavior. Imagine a cop every 1,000 feet on the highway, constantly directing your every move. That would feel oppressive, like forced compliance. So a boundary is, I need to know if plans change because it helps me manage my anxiety. Control is, you have to text me every hour or else. One states a personal need and empowers you to act. The other dictates someone else's actions and tries to remove their agency.
Right, and this whole journey, healing, learning, communicating, setting boundaries, it isn't a quick fix, is it? So practice patience and consistency must be absolutely key to seeing real, lasting change.
It absolutely is, profoundly so. Rebuilding trust, transforming ingrained habits, cultivating new ways of relating. It takes considerable time, immense courage, and consistent, persistent effort from everyone. Deeply ingrained habits don't change overnight. They require consistent, gentle, yet firm redirection. And, vitally, we're all human. We'll all stumble, make mistakes along the way. Granting grace to yourself and others is incredibly important. Control, by contrast, often demands now. It mandates something can't ever happen again, expecting instant perfection. But for something truly lasting, truly transformative, patience, consistency, and relentless perseverance aren't just nice to have. They are non-negotiable requirements for deep, sustainable change.
Beyond these individual steps, how do we foster a broader trust-based relationship culture? A space where everyone feels safe, respected, free to be themselves.
One powerful way, often overlooked, is to celebrate progress. When you consciously acknowledge and celebrate even the smallest wins, the tiny steps forward, you infuse the whole process with purpose, meaning, joy. Whether it's acknowledging a small step towards trust, a difficult conversation handled with grace, a successful communication, making a big deal of it, maybe going out to eat, having a favorite dessert, or just verbally acknowledging it, hey, that was great how we talked that through. It fuels motivation, inspiration, reinforces the positive changes. Enjoying the journey itself becomes as vital as just focusing on the end goal. Next, and deeply connected, is to cultivate mutual respect. When trust is broken or relationships are dominated by control, we often start seeing each other through this negative, diminished lens. It becomes hard to respect someone you don't trust or who controls you. But cultivating mutual respect means actively committing to showing the other person their inherent value, their worth, their dignity. Even when trust is broken, even when their choices are difficult, even when you disagree fundamentally. Focusing on their inherent value and equality as humans resets the relationship tone. It fosters a genuine sense of partnership, shared responsibility, mutual admiration, rather than that dynamic of, you're less than, or I know better.
And finally, something that sounds maybe counterintuitive but feels so vital for real connection, encourage vulnerability.
Yes, because vulnerability is not weakness. It is, in fact, the most profound and courageous strength a person can possess. It takes immense courage to risk getting hurt by truly opening up, showing your authentic self, sharing fears and dreams. But being vulnerable is precisely what creates genuine connection, fosters deep intimacy, and prevents that subtle, suffocating separation and disconnection that control ultimately imposes. If you stop being vulnerable, if you close off your heart out of fear, a relationship can get stuck in this superficial loop, or worse, just slowly wither away. Cultivating a culture where vulnerability isn't just tolerated but genuinely encouraged and celebrated allows trust to truly bloom. It allows two individuals to truly see, understand, and connect with each other. It's the pathway to a truly rich, fulfilling, and free relationship.
Wow. Ultimately, letting go of the need to control everything. It isn't about giving up power, is it? It's about reclaiming a deeper, more authentic, and infinitely more sustainable power within yourself. It's about recognizing that true freedom, profound inner peace, genuine connection. They don't bloom from dictating outcomes or manipulating situations. They bloom from bravely embracing uncertainty, cultivating real trust in others, and most importantly, fostering that deep, unwavering self-compassion for yourself.
So as you reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider this. What small, intentional act of letting go, perhaps embracing a let the moment today, or practicing just a short self-compassion break? What small act can you integrate into your day, maybe starting right now, to begin cultivating that profound sense of inner peace and healthier, more authentic connection?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep growing.